Hello everyone. We often hear warnings about the hidden corners of the internet, places designed for anonymity where illicit activities can thrive. But sometimes, those warnings aren't enough. Tonight's story serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of venturing into the unknown online. It's a true crime narrative focusing on a decision, an exploration into the dark web, that had irreversible and fatal outcomes. Prepare yourselves for a sobering and scary tale. We're looking at True Crime Dark Web Was a Deadly Mistake Scary Stories. My name's Frank Miller. Used to be Detective Frank Miller, Homicide Division, LAPD. Now I'm just Frank Miller, retired. 68 years old, joints that complain louder than a rookie caught sleeping on watch, and a pension that just about covers the bills and my occasional indulgence in cheap whiskey. Retirement sounds peaceful on paper. Trade the flashing blue lights and yellow tape for crossword puzzles and reruns of old cop shows. Yeah, peaceful. But quiet ain't always peaceful. Sometimes, quiet just gives the ghosts more room to whisper. For 35 years, I've walked the tightrope between the city's sun-drenched facade and its grimy underbelly. I saw things that'd curdle your morning coffee, things that clawed their way into your sleep and stayed there, squatting in the dark corners of your mind. Most cases, you solve them. You put the cuffs on, you testify, the system grinds on. Closure, they call it. Sometimes it feels like it, sometimes it just feels like closing a door on a room full of screams. But you move on. You have to. Compartmentalize, they teach you. Lock it away. Except for one. The West Side Carver. That name still tastes like ash in my mouth. Summer of '98. Hot, sticky, smog-choked Los Angeles summer. He hit fast, brutal, and vanished like smoke. 4 victims in 6 weeks. Young women, all found in their apartments on the West Side, hence the unimaginative moniker the press slapped on him. The way they were found, that's what stuck. Not just killed. Dismantled. Arranged. It wasn't frenzy, it was ritual. Cold, meticulous, terrifyingly precise. Like an artist signing his work, only his medium was human suffering. We threw everything we had at it. Task force, round-the-clock surveillance, hundreds of interviews, mountains of forensic evidence that led precisely nowhere. No DNA matches, no viable prints left at the scenes that weren't the victims, no witnesses who saw anything more substantial than a shadow. He was a phantom, a whisper in the concrete jungle. He taunted us. Notes left at the scenes, not for the public, but cryptic messages seemingly aimed at the investigation itself. Mentioning details only the cops working the case knew, procedural slips, internal debates. It felt personal. It felt like he was inside our heads. Then, as suddenly as he started, he stopped. 6 weeks of terror, then silence. Just gone. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief. The task force eventually scaled back, then disbanded. Resources were diverted to newer horrors. But for me, for the handful of us who worked it closest, it never stopped. It became the case file that gathered dust on the shelf, but never in my mind. Officially, it went cold. A stack of reports, photos, and dead ends locked away in archives. Unofficially, it festered. It was the question mark at the end of my career, the shadow that followed me home every night. Retirement was supposed to be the end of that. Time to finally let the ghosts rest. But like I said, quiet gives them room. Without the daily grind, the new cases demanding attention, the Carver case expanded to fill the void. I'd sit in my armchair, the television droning unnoticed, and I'd be back there, smelling the iron tang of blood in a too-quiet apartment, staring at Polaroids that stole a piece of your soul with every glance. Did we miss something? Some tiny detail? Some overlooked connection? Was he dead? Did he move away? Or was he still out there, watching, waiting? The official theory leaned towards the killer dying or being incarcerated for something else, severing the pattern. It was neat. Tidy. And I never bought it for a goddamn second. The meticulousness, the control, it didn't scream self-destruction or petty crime. It screamed patience. I tried talking to some of the old guys. Henderson, my partner back then, just shook his head over beers, told me to let it lie, enjoy the grandkids I didn't have. It's over, Frank. Dead or caged. Either way, he ain't carving no more. Easy for him to say. He wasn't lead. He didn't get the late night calls, didn't see the raw files, didn't feel the weight of those cryptic notes like they were addressed directly to him. So, I started digging again. Quietly. Unofficially. Pulled out my own boxes of notes, things I probably shouldn't have kept, photocopies of reports, crime scene sketches I'd redrawn countless times, looking for a pattern I hadn't seen before. Hours spent online, trawling through digitized newspaper archives, looking for cold case forums, anything. It was mostly junk. Armchair detectives rehashing the same public information, conspiracy nuts blaming aliens or the government. Frustration mounted. It felt like yelling into a void. Then, I remembered the whispers from the younger guys back on the force, the tech-savvy ones. Talk about the dark web. A hidden layer of the internet, anonymous, untraceable, where the worst of humanity festered. Illegal markets, forbidden content, and maybe, just maybe, places where secrets were traded, where chatter happened beyond the reach of official surveillance. It felt wrong. Dirty. Like consorting with the enemy. I was old school. Give me shoe leather, knocking on doors, reading a suspect's eyes. This felt detached. Cowardly, almost. But the Carver case wasn't playing by the old rules. Maybe I had to break a few myself. Took me a week just to figure out how to access it safely. Tor browsers, VPNs, warnings flashing on my screen about illegal activity and potential dangers. My old desktop computer whirred, protesting the strain. The initial plunge was nauseating. A chaotic mess of cryptic links, forums dedicated to ideologies that made my stomach turn, marketplaces selling things I didn't want to comprehend. I almost clicked off a dozen times, the ingrained cop sense screaming that this was a cesspool I shouldn't be wading through. But the Carver whispered louder. I refined my search, looking for forums dedicated to true crime, specifically unsolved cases, filtering out the obvious garbage. It was like panning for gold in a sewer. Days turned into late nights, fueled by stale coffee and obsession. My small study became a cave, lit only by the monitor's glow reflecting off my tired eyes. The air grew stale. I barely noticed. And then I found it. Not a forum specifically about the carver, but a subsection within a larger, deeply unsettling forum dedicated to predatory arts, as they chillingly called it. The subsection was titled Masterpieces Unclaimed. It discussed unsolved serial cases with a disturbing blend of academic detachment and connoisseurship. My blood ran cold reading the initial descriptions, but I forced myself to scroll, searching for any mention of Los Angeles of the late 90s. There it was. A thread simply titled WC98. West Side Carver, 1998. My breath hitched. I clicked. The first few posts were standard rehashes of the public case details. Then it started to change. Users with anonymous, often disturbing handles began dissecting the crimes with accuracy. Unnerving accuracy. They discussed entry methods that weren't released to the press. They debated the specific order of the mutilations, details only present in the confidential autopsy reports. One user, Chirurgeon7, posted a detailed analysis of the likely psychological profile of the killer that mirrored almost exactly the confidential assessment done by the FBI profiler assigned to our task force, a report I hadn't looked at in 20 years but remembered vividly. Another user, Echo_man, speculated about the placement of specific items at the scene, suggesting symbolic meanings that my team had debated endlessly behind closed doors but never made public for fear of copycats or compromising the investigation. They talked about potential escape routes, disposal methods for evidence, things we'd wargamed but found no proof of. It wasn't just speculation, it felt informed. Too informed. How? How could these anonymous ghouls know these details? Were they ex-cops? Leakers? Or something else? My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't just morbid curiosity. This felt connected. I spent hours scrolling, reading, absorbing the cold, analytical discussion of horrors I'd witnessed firsthand. The level of detail was staggering, terrifying. They discussed the cryptic notes left at the scenes, arguing over interpretations, even quoting phrases verbatim, phrases that were never released publicly. My hands started shaking. This place, this dark corner of the digital world, knew things it shouldn't know. Knew things about my case. The case that had defined and broken a part of me. A cold dread washed over me, colder than any Los Angeles night. I wasn't just reading about the West Side Carver anymore. It felt like I was closer to him than I'd ever been in that stifling summer of '98. Closer and infinitely more vulnerable. The glow of the monitor felt like an eye watching me back. The silence of my house suddenly seemed too loud, pregnant with unseen listeners. I leaned closer, scrolling deeper into the thread, completely consumed, unaware of how deep I was truly sinking. The forum became my world. Days bled into nights, measured not by the sun, but by the rhythmic click of my mouse and the relentless glow of the screen. Sleep was fitful, haunted by fragmented case files and the cryptic usernames of the forum's denizens, Chirurgeon7, Echo_man, Somniphobe, Veritas Obscura. Each post I read was a breadcrumb leading deeper into a forest I wasn't sure I wanted to navigate, yet couldn't bring myself to leave. The accuracy wasn't just unnerving anymore, it was surgical. One thread, started by Chirurgeon7, discussed the specific brand of duct tape used on the third victim, Patricia Holloway. They debated its tensile strength, the manufacturer's distribution patterns in Southern California in the late 90s, even the likely retailers where it could have been purchased cash only without raising flags. This wasn't public information. We chased that specific tape lead down countless rabbit holes, interviewing hardware store owners, checking wholesale records, all hitting dead ends. But the level of detail in the forum discussion, they knew the exact goddamn SKUs we were looking at. How? How was that possible unless someone involved in the original investigation was leaking? Or unless the carver himself enjoyed reliving his procurement process? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Another user, Echo_man, posted a long, rambling treatise on the psychological significance of the locations chosen. Not just the West Side apartments, but the specific apartments. He theorized about lines of sight, ambient noise levels, proximity to specific types of public transit, weaving a narrative about the killer's comfort zones and surveillance patterns that felt eerily resonant with the vague, unsubstantiated hunches I'd had back then, hunches born from staring at maps until my eyes burned. He talked about the liminal spaces the killer exploited, alleys, service corridors, the brief moments of vulnerability between street and sanctuary. It was articulate, intelligent, and utterly terrifying. It felt less like speculation and more like memoir. My initial sense of validation, that I wasn't crazy for thinking the case wasn't truly cold, curdled into a thick, pervasive paranoia. The anonymity of the forum became a suffocating blanket. Any one of these usernames could be him. Convergence7, with his cold, clinical precision. Echo_man, with his intimate understanding of the city's hidden pathways. Or maybe one of the quieter ones, lurking, reading, absorbing. He could be reading my reactions, metaphorically speaking, gauging the ripples his posts caused in the dark waters of this forum. My house, once a quiet refuge, started to feel like a glass box. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, every flicker of the streetlights sent my heart rate spiking. Was that car parked across the street there yesterday? Did that shadow in the periphery move? I started double-checking the locks, something I hadn't done habitually since my early days on the force. I'd catch my reflection in the dark monitor screen, haggard, pale, eyes wide, and barely recognize the man staring back. Frank Miller, retired detective, was fading. In his place was just Frank, the haunted old man, peering into an abyss that was starting to peer back. I wrestled constantly with the urge to engage. To type something, anything. To challenge a detail, offer a counter-theory, maybe even drop a piece of carefully chosen misinformation to see how they reacted. What about the witness who saw a blue sedan near the second scene? A detail we'd investigated and dismissed, never released. Would they call bullshit? Would they correct me? Or would they incorporate it, revealing their own knowledge gaps, or confirming their omniscience? But the fear always won. Engaging felt like painting a target on my back. Here, anonymous, I was just another lurker, another ghoul picking over old bones. If I spoke up, if I revealed even a hint of my true connection to the case, I'd be exposed. And something deep in my gut screamed that exposure was the last thing I wanted. This wasn't just a discussion forum, it felt like a predator's hunting ground, and I had willingly walked into the snare. The posts became more targeted, or maybe my paranoia was just sharpening my perception. A new thread appeared, badge and burden, when the case follows you home. It discussed investigators who became obsessed, who couldn't let go. It talked about the psychological toll, the lines blurred between duty and fixation. It felt pointed, like a commentary directed at anyone like me who might be lurking. Then, a post by Veritas Obscura analyzed the carver's notes left at the scenes. They focused on the third note, the one left with victim Brenda Lopez. They quoted a line, "The shepherd worries, but the flock scatters anyway." A line that was never made public. Only the core task force members and the chief knew the exact wording. My breath caught in my throat. Seeing it typed out on the screen, discussed casually by anonymous strangers, felt like a violation, a desecration of something locked away for decades. How? Who were these people? Disgruntled ex-cops selling secrets? True crime fanatics with impossible access? Or was the simplest, most terrifying answer the correct one? Was the carver, or someone intimately connected to him, using this platform to gloat, to reminisce, to perhaps even seek out loose ends? The feeling of being watched intensified. Not just by potential eyes outside my window, but digitally. It felt like the forum itself was aware of me. Like my clicks, my scrolling speed, the time I spent on certain threads, were all being logged, analyzed. Was I imagining the slight pauses in new posts after I'd spent hours reading a specific thread? Was the timing of certain replies just coincidence? The rational part of my brain, the detective part, screamed for evidence, for proof. But the primal part, the part that had stared into the abyss of the Carver case 20-odd years ago, knew better. Sometimes, you don't need proof. You just know. It happened late one Tuesday night. Or maybe early Wednesday morning. Time had lost all meaning beyond the timestamps on the forum posts. The house was silent except for the hum of the computer and the frantic beating of my own heart. I'd been scrolling through the WC98 thread for hours, caught in a loop of fascination and dread, rereading theories about the killer's cooling-off period and potential triggers for his cessation. My eyes burned, gritty with lack of sleep. I was about to finally push away from the desk, concede defeat to exhaustion, when a small notification icon blinked in the corner of the forum interface. A private message. I rarely interacted with the private messaging system. It felt too direct, too risky. I had no messages waiting, ever. Until now. My mouse hovered over the icon, a wave of inexplicable cold washing over me despite the stuffy air in the study. This was it. The moment the lurking fear coalesced into something tangible. My hand trembled as I clicked. The message window opened. A simple, stark white box against the dark theme of the forum. The sender, Echo_man. The subject line was blank. Below it, just 2 lines of text. 2 lines that stopped my heart cold. Badge number 714. Still poking around, old man? He remembers you. Badge number 714. Not just any number. My number. Assigned to me the day I made detective, carried until the day I retired. It wasn't on any public record associated with the Carver case. It might have been in deep personnel files, sure, but connected to this? To my anonymous presence on a hidden dark web forum? How? How could anyone here know that number? Still poking around, old man? The casual, mocking familiarity. Acknowledging my age, my persistence, my current activity. Reducing my obsessive, fear-fueled Questamere poking around. And the final, gut-wrenching sentence, he remembers you. He. Not someone remembers, not we know about you. He. The Carver. The phantom we hunted, the monster we thought long dead or dormant. Echo_man wasn't just some knowledgeable user. He was a messenger. Or worse. The Carver wasn't just a case file anymore. He wasn't just a ghost whispering from the past. He was real. He was aware. And he remembered me, Frank Miller, badge number 714. The screen seemed to waver. The room tilted. I felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo, like the floor had dropped away beneath my chair. My breath came in ragged gasps. The digital ghost had reached through the screen, through the anonymity of the dark web, and laid a cold, spectral hand directly on my soul. The case wasn't cold. It wasn't even history. It was here. Now. And it knew exactly who I was. The words burned on the screen, seared into my retinas. Badge number 714. He remembers you. My first coherent thought wasn't analytical. It was pure animal panic. I slammed the laptop shut with a crack, shoving my chair back so hard it screeched across the worn wooden floor and nearly tipped over. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, each beat echoing the frantic rhythm of blood rushing in my ears. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling towards the window, yanking aside the blinds to stare wildly into the indifferent darkness of the suburban street. Headlights swept past. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Nothing. No hooded figures lurking in the shadows, no black sedan idling at the curb. Just the quiet, empty stage of ordinary night. But the emptiness offered no comfort. The threat wasn't necessarily out there, not yet. It was in here, beamed directly into my study, bypassing locked doors and drawn blinds. It knew my badge number. It knew I was poking around. It knew I was an old man. And he, the butcher who'd haunted my waking thoughts and sleeping nightmares for decades, remembered me. My training kicked in, a rusty reflex arc firing through the panic. Secure the perimeter. I went through the house room by room, checking locks on doors and windows, peering through peepholes, my breath fogging the glass. Every shadow seemed too deep, every familiar object suddenly alien and potentially threatening. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with menacing slowness. Was that floorboard creak just the owls settling, or something else? In the back of my dusty closet, behind boxes of old uniforms and memorabilia I couldn't bring myself to discard, was my old service weapon. A Glock 22. Haven't fired it in years, but I kept it cleaned, oiled. Habit. Or maybe foresight. My hand trembled as I checked the magazine, the cold weight of the steel a small, inadequate comfort against the formless, digital dread. Who could I tell? Call Henderson? Hey, Dave, remember the Carver? Yeah, well, some guy on the dark web calling himself Echo_man just sent me a message saying the killer remembers me and knows my old badge number. No, I don't know who he is. Yes, the dark web. No, I don't have any actual proof he's the Carver. They think I've finally lost it. Senile dementia, brought on by obsession and too much cheap whiskey. They'd send a wellness check, maybe suggest a nice quiet home. Going to the current brass? Even worse, admitting I, a retired detective, was trawling the dregs of the internet. They'd laugh me out of the station, or worse, open an internal investigation into me. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone with this knowledge. The anonymity I'd sought on the dark web had backfired. It had isolated me completely. Sleep was impossible. I sat in my armchair, the Glock resting heavy on the side table, the laptop dark and silent on the desk across the room. It felt like a coiled snake, waiting. Why contact me? Why now, after all these years? Was it the forum activity? Had I inadvertently tripped some invisible wire by digging too deep into the WC98 thread? What did he remembers you mean? Did the carver hold a personal grudge? I racked my brain, replaying the investigation. Did I say something inflammatory in a press conference? Did I stare him down in an interview room without realizing who he was? We interviewed hundreds. Could he have been one of them, enjoying the game, the proximity to the chaos he'd wrought? Or was it simpler? Was I, the lead detective who never gave up, just an irritating loose end he now felt compelled to tie off? The ambiguity was its own form of torture. After 2 days of near catatonic paralysis, fueled by caffeine and fear, I forced myself to open the laptop again. My hand shook logging back into the dark web portal, navigating the familiar, repulsive links back to the forum. It felt like willingly sticking my head back into the lion's mouth. I checked my private messages. Nothing new from Echo_man. I scanned the WC98 thread. New posts had appeared, dissecting the fourth victim's timeline with the same chilling expertise. No direct mention of me, no reference to badge numbers or old men. But the atmosphere felt different. Charged. Or maybe it was just me, projecting my terror onto the indifferent text. Then, the lines started to blur. The digital threat began to seep into the physical world, like ink bleeding through paper. It started subtly. Mail delivered to the wrong address down the street, even though the numbers on my house are clear. A persistent flickering in the porch light bulb I just replaced. Cold spots in the house that had never been there before. Easy to dismiss. Old house, faulty wiring, overwrought imagination. Plausible deniability. But then, things escalated, just slightly. I went out for groceries, my first trip outside in days, and the entire time, I felt eyes on me. A profound, prickling sense of being watched. A nondescript gray sedan seemed to be behind me for several blocks, turning when I turned, disappearing when I finally pulled into the supermarket parking lot. Coincidence? Probably. But the certainty felt ice cold in my gut. Back home, I found the lid on my sugar bowl slightly askew. I always put it on straight. Always. It was a tiny thing, insignificant. But it screamed intrusion. Someone had been here. Or my mind was finally unraveling, constructing threads out of household minutiae. Which was worse? One evening, listening to the police scanner online, another old habit, I heard a call come in. A prowler reported a few blocks away, description vague, male, average height, wearing a dark hoodie. Gone before the patrol car arrived. Nothing came of it. But my address wasn't mentioned. Was it him, testing the response times? Circling closer? Or just another random city incident amplified by my own fear? The Watcher wasn't just digital anymore. I felt him in the creaks of the house, in the shadows that seemed too long, in the silence that pressed in on me. The forum, echo_man, the message, they were just a prologue. The real horror was the slow, insidious erosion of my sanctuary, the knowledge that the monster from my past wasn't just a memory, but an active presence, aware, patient, and drawing nearer. Last night, I found something on my doorstep. Not a package, not junk mail. Just a single, dried pressed flower. A night-scented stalk. Innocuous enough. Except it was the exact same rare type of flower Brenda Lopez, the third victim, had in a vase beside her bed. The detail was noted in the crime scene inventory, but never released, deemed irrelevant at the time. It wasn't left for me. It was placed at me. A message far clearer than any text on a screen. He doesn't just remember me. He knows where I live. I'm sitting here now, in my study. The clock is on the desk, not in the closet. The laptop is open, the dark web forum glowing faintly. I haven't checked for new messages. I don't need to. The message has already been delivered. The silence in the house is different tonight. It's not empty. It's listening. Waiting. Every car that passes, every distant siren, every tick of the clock is a countdown. Retirement isn't peaceful. It's the final, terrifying cold case. Mine. And the carver? He's out there. Or maybe he's closer than that. Maybe the Watcher isn't just in the digital walls anymore. Maybe he's already inside. The floorboards upstairs just creaked. But I live alone. My name is Grace Miller. It feels strange to say that now, like recalling the name of a character from a book I read long ago, someone disconnected from the perpetually scanning, nerve-shredded creature I've become. But yes, I was Grace Miller, a doctoral candidate in history at Georgetown, bright-eyed, maybe a little too ambitious, and utterly convinced that the darkest corners of the human past held the most illuminating truths about our present. My thesis, the millstone that both anchored my life and threatened to drag me under, was titled Mechanisms of Control, an evolutionary study of torture techniques from antiquity to the early modern period. Catchy, I know. My advisor, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose tweed jacket smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and archival dust, had raised a skeptical eyebrow when I first proposed it. Grace, he'd sighed, polishing his spectacles, it's bleak territory. Important, undeniably. But are you certain you want to immerse yourself in that level of human depravity for the next 3 to 5 years? I was certain. Or at least, I thought I was. I wasn't interested in the gore, the cheap shock value. I was fascinated by the ingenuity. The horrifying creativity humans employ to inflict pain, yes, but more than that, the way these techniques reflected societal anxieties, power structures, evolving understandings of the body, the soul, and the very definition of truth. The rack, the strappado, the Iron Maiden, the Judas Cradle, they weren't just instruments, they were physical manifestations of ideologies, intricate machines designed not just to break bodies, but to assert dominance, extract confessions, true or false, and enforce conformity. I saw them as dark mirrors to the societies that created them. The initial research was standard academic drudgery, endless hours in the university library's rare books section, deciphering medieval Latin texts, cross-referencing accounts from inquisitors' manuals, legal documents, and the occasional harrowing first-hand narrative. I meticulously cataloged the subtle shifts, the Roman focus on public spectacle, the medieval obsession with extracting confessions for spiritual purity, the early modern period's quasi-scientific approach to calibrated suffering. Digitized archives offered more, grainy scans of woodcuts depicting scenes of torment, surprisingly detailed schematics from inventors who treated pain delivery like an engineering problem. But I hit a wall. The publicly available information, while extensive, felt sanitized, filtered. There were gaps, references to practices only hinted at, devices described with frustrating vagueness. Whispers existed in obscure footnotes and online historical forums, whispers of collections too controversial, too graphic, too real for mainstream academia or even the more permissive digital archives. They spoke of a place on the dark web, a repository supposedly containing uncensored materials, diagrams deemed too disturbing, historical accounts too raw for public consumption. They called it the Iron Library. Most dismissed it as a myth, an urban legend for morbid history buffs. But the references, though scarce, were persistent and sometimes appeared in surprisingly credible, albeit anonymous, online discussions. The idea lodged itself in my brain like a parasite. My thesis felt incomplete, lacking the visceral, unvarnished truth I suspected lay hidden. Driven by a potent cocktail of academic ambition and a burgeoning, slightly shameful curiosity, I decided to seek it out. Navigating the dark web was a crash course in digital paranoia. Tor browser, VPNs layered like geological strata, burner email addresses, forums where conversations unfolded in cryptic shorthand. It took weeks of patient lurking, following breadcrumb trails of obscure links and coded recommendations. The process felt illicit, transgressive, a world away from the quiet respectability of the university library. Finally, in a forum dedicated to unconventional historical sources, a user named Sharon responded to my carefully worded inquiry with a single, nondescript onion link and the phrase, "Knowledge bears a price. Verification required upon arrival." My heart hammered against my ribs as I pasted the link into the Tor browser. The page that loaded was stark black, minimalist. A single icon resembling a stylized, antique keyhole pulsed slowly in the center. Below it, the words, "The Iron Library, Access Portal." And beneath that, a small, innocuous button labeled, "Initiate Verification Scan." A cold wave of unease washed over me. Verification? How? A text box appeared. To ensure the integrity of our collection and prevent automated access, a brief biometric facial scan is required. Your data is used solely for access verification and is not stored or shared. Place your face within the indicated frame. A webcam feed flickered to life, showing my own pale, tired face reflected back at me, framed by faint digital lines. This was it. The point of no return. Every instinct screamed danger. Giving biometric data to an anonymous entity on the dark web? It was monumentally stupid, reckless beyond measure. My carefully constructed digital anonymity would be shattered. But the library, the promise of unfiltered knowledge, the key to unlocking the final, crucial layer of my thesis, it was right there. Years of work, the looming pressure of my defense, the desire to produce something truly groundbreaking, it all warred against my common sense. "It's just a quick scan," I rationalized, my cursor hovering over the button. Anti-bot security. Standard practice in some secure systems. What could they possibly do with a momentary facial geometry map? It's anonymous, untraceable back to Grace Miller. The justifications felt thin, even to me, but ambition is a powerful opiate. I took a deep breath, leaned in, aligned my face with the frame, and clicked the button. A faint blue light emanated from the screen, scanning my face for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the keyhole icon animated, turning, clicking open. The screen refreshed, revealing rows upon rows of categorized links: antiquity, medieval Europe, Inquisition records, East Asian methods, early modern innovations, uncategorized schematics. I had arrived. The Iron Library was everything the Whispers promised and more. It was vast, chillingly comprehensive. The diagrams were far more detailed than anything I'd seen before, showing internal mechanisms, stress points on the human body, precise angles of leverage. There were digitized scrolls, scanned pages from forbidden books, detached clinical descriptions of procedures, eyewitness accounts that made my stomach churn, audio recordings of, well, I tried not to dwell on those. It wasn't just the graphic nature, it was the coldness, the sheer volume of meticulously documented human cruelty, stripped bare of any moral commentary. I lost track of time, diving deep into the section on medieval European techniques. The rack, in particular, held a morbid fascination. Not just the basic principle of stretching, but the variations, the specific ways interrogators targeted certain joints, the documented stages of dislocation. I spent hours, possibly days cumulatively, staring at one specific set of diagrams, a series showing the victim's body contorted at progressive stages of tension. The angles of the limbs, the arch of the back, the tilt of the head, it was all rendered with horrifying, anatomical precision. I saved copies, took notes, cross-referenced with other texts in the library. My thesis was finally taking shape, becoming the definitive, unflinching work I'd envisioned. The risk, I told myself, had been worth it. That was 3 weeks ago. The initial thrill of discovery had faded, replaced by a low-level hum of anxiety and the persistent metallic taste of revulsion in the back of my throat. The work was taking its toll. I slept poorly, haunted by fragmented images from the diagrams. Last night, I was working late, fueled by lukewarm coffee and academic pressure. Around 2 a.m., needing air, I went to my apartment window, which overlooks the quiet residential street below. Most lights were out, except for the lone sodium streetlight directly across the road, casting a sickly orange glow. And someone was standing under it. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. People walked home late, waited for rides. But this person wasn't moving. They were stock still. Facing my building, though I couldn't make out any features in the dim light and shadow. Just a silhouette. Tall, thin. I watched for a minute, waiting for them to move, to walk on, to check their phone. Nothing. They just stood there. Then, a cold dread, sharp and piercing, lanced through me. The way they were standing. It wasn't natural. The limbs were held at odd angles, the torso slightly twisted, the head tilted back just so. It was a pose. My blood turned to ice water. I knew that pose. I had stared at diagrams of it for hours upon hours just days before. It was precise, unmistakable. the exact configuration of a body subjected to the initial stages of the medieval rack before the full tension was applied. Perfectly still, perfectly mimicking the diagram. Standing directly across the street, bathed in the dead glow of the streetlight. Waiting. I stumble back from the window, my breath catching in my throat, the coffee mug slipping from my numb fingers to shatter on the floor. The iron library. The facial scan. Verification required upon arrival. Stupid, stupid, stupid. What had I verified? And who, or what, had just confirmed they received it? Across the street, the figure remained, an unwavering silhouette of historical agony brought to life, its unseen face implicitly turned towards my window. The crash of the coffee mug seemed to echo in the sudden, suffocating silence of my apartment. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. For a long moment, I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, the shards of ceramic and cooling coffee spreading around my bare feet. Then, propelled by a surge of adrenaline-fueled terror, I scrambled back, away from the window, pressing myself into the corner of the room, eyes wide, fixed on the drawn curtains. It was still out there. I knew it. The image was burned onto my retinas, the unnatural stillness, the precise, horrific geometry of that pose under the dead orange light. The rack. Stage 1. A posture of anticipated agony, rendered in flesh and shadow across the street. How long did I stay huddled there? Minutes? An hour? Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. Eventually, the primal need to know overcame the paralysis. Crawling on hands and knees, keeping low, I crept back towards the window. I peered through a tiny gap between the curtain and the frame, my breath held tight. The figure was gone. The street was empty. Just the streetlight, the parked cars, the silent facades of the opposite buildings. Relief washed over me, so potent it left me weak and trembling. It was gone. Maybe I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, the morbid subject matter finally getting to me. God knows, I hadn't been sleeping well. The images from the Iron Library had a way of lingering, festering in the subconscious. A waking nightmare, perhaps. A hallucination born of academic obsession and too much caffeine. I wanted to believe that. Desperately. I spent the rest of the night oscillating between frantic rationalization and heart-stopping fear, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren. Sleep was impossible. When the gray light of dawn finally filtered through the curtains, it brought exhaustion but no comfort. The memory of the figure felt too real, too specific. The precision of the pose haunted me. It wasn't just a random shape in the shadows, it was a direct quote from the darkest corners of my research. The next few days were a blur of heightened anxiety. I triple-checked the locks on my door and windows. I covered the webcam on my laptop with duct tape, a gesture that felt both foolishly paranoid and utterly necessary. I avoided looking out the window after dark. The city outside, once familiar, now seemed menacing, pregnant with unseen watchers. Every person standing idly on a street corner, every car lingering too long at the curb, sent a jolt of fear through me. My work on the thesis ground to a halt. The thought of opening the files saved from the Iron Library, of looking at those diagrams again, filled me with a nauseating dread. They were no longer just historical artifacts. They felt tainted, active, like conduits to whatever horror I had glimpsed. Even my conventional research notes seemed contaminated. Trying to read about the strappado or the wheel felt like handling cursed objects. Dr. Thorne noticed the change, of course. During our weekly meeting, held over Zoom, I'd made an excuse about a cold to avoid going to campus. He peered at me through the screen, his brow furrowed with concern. "Grace, are you all right? You seem rattled. And your progress this week seems negligible." "I'm fine, Dr. Thorne," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just hit a bit of a research snag. Feeling slightly under the weather. This topic." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's demanding. Emotionally taxing. Don't hesitate to take a break if you need one. Or to talk if something is troubling you." I wanted to confide in him, to spill the whole insane story, the dark web, the facial scan, the figure under the streetlight. But how could I? He'd think I was having a breakdown, that the grim subject matter had finally fractured my sanity. He might even insist I abandon the thesis. The thought was unbearable. My work was the only thing that still felt remotely real, even if it was now inextricably linked to my terror. So, I just nodded and promised to get back on track. Isolation became my default state. I screened calls from friends, let emails pile up unanswered. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. But leaving it felt worse. At least inside, I had locks, curtains, the illusion of control. A week after the initial sighting, it happened again. I had forced myself to run essential errands, groceries, picking up prints from the university copy center. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning to dip, casting long shadows. I was walking back, keys clutched tight in my fist, hurrying along a side street near my building. An alleyway opened to my left, choked with overflowing dumpsters and graffiti. And standing deep within the shadows, almost invisible against the grimy brick, was another figure. Still. Motionless. This time, the pose was different. Lower to the ground. One leg bent awkwardly, the torso contorted, head bowed. My mind, now horribly attuned to these shapes, instantly supplied the reference, the cramped, agonizing posture forced by the scavenger's daughter, or perhaps the initial, crushing descent onto a Judas cradle. Again, the mimicry was sickeningly precise. I didn't stop, didn't scream. I just walked faster, my gaze fixed straight ahead, pretending I hadn't seen it. But I felt its presence like a physical weight, the implied gaze burning into the side of my face as I passed the alley's mouth. When I risked a frantic glance back from the corner, the alley was empty. The rationalizations crumbled. This wasn't stress. This wasn't hallucination. This was real. It was targeted. And it was directly linked to the specific images I had studied in the Iron Library. The facial scan, it wasn't just for verification. It was identification. They knew who I was. They knew what I was looking at. And now, they were showing me. We see you. We know your darkest interests. We are bringing them to life. The fear became constant, a low thrum beneath my skin. Strange things started happening in the apartment. Small things easily dismissed on their own, but forming a disturbing pattern. A stack of research papers on my desk, meticulously ordered, would be slightly rearranged overnight. A specific diagram file on my laptop, one depicting thumbscrews, seemed corrupted, glitching, the lines momentarily twisting into unfamiliar patterns before resolving. Once, I came home to find a single, antique-looking iron nail lying innocuously on my doorstep. There was no construction nearby. The feeling of being watched intensified. Sometimes, late at night, I hear faint scratching sounds. Not mice, this was different. A rhythmic, deliberate scraping, seemingly coming from the walls themselves, or perhaps the door. It always stopped the moment I made a noise or moved towards the source. One evening, driven by a desperate need to understand, or perhaps just to reclaim some sense of agency, I forced myself to open my laptop and navigate back to the Tor browser. My hands trembled as I pasted the onion link for the Iron Library. The black screen loaded, the keyhole pulsing. I hesitated. Was this inviting it further in? But I had to know. Was there any clue, any indication of who ran this place, anything I had missed? Before I could click anything, before the verification prompt even appeared, my laptop's webcam light flickered on. Green. Bright. Accusatory. I hadn't touched it. The duct tape was still firmly in place, but the light shone through it, an eerie, diffused glow. A profound chill, colder than anything I'd felt before, seeped into the room, raising goosebumps on my arms. My blood ran cold. They weren't just watching me on the street. They were inside. Virtually, at least. The scan hadn't just been an entry key, it had been a permission slip. And then I heard it again. Louder this time. Closer. Scratch. Scrape. Scratch. Coming directly from my apartment door. A slow, deliberate, rhythmic sound, like fingernails, or perhaps something harder, something metallic, being dragged across the wood. Scratch. Scrape. Scratch. I sat frozen, staring at the faint green glow bleeding through the tape on my screen, listening to the sound at the door, the fragile barrier separating me from what? The library wasn't just an archive anymore. It was a keyhole they could peer through, a door I had foolishly unlocked. And something was now scratching, patiently, persistently, wanting to be let in. Frozen. That's the only word for it. Time ceased to flow, contracting into the space between the faint, malevolent green glow bleeding through the tape on my webcam and the rhythmic, insistent scratch at my apartment door. My lungs burned for air I couldn't seem to draw. The cold in the room wasn't just a physical sensation anymore. It felt metaphysical, a leaching away of warmth, of safety, of sanity itself. The scratching was methodical, unhurried. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of an animal. It was deliberate, like something testing the wood, examining the locks, patiently working its way through. My gaze flickered between the violating green light on the laptop and the solid, yet suddenly inadequate, barrier of the door. They were connected. The digital intrusion and the physical presence at my threshold were two arms of the same horrifying entity, an entity I had invited, however unwittingly, with a click of a mouse and a moment of reckless ambition. A primal instinct, buried under layers of academic detachment, finally screamed, "Act!" With a strangled gasp, I lunged forward, not towards the door, but towards the laptop. My fingers fumbled, slamming the lid shut. For a fraction of a second, the green light vanished, and a sliver of hope pierced the terror. But the scratching didn't stop. If anything, it intensified, growing louder, raspier, accompanied now by a faint, rhythmic thudding, like something gently bumping against the lower panel of the door. My breath hitched. Creeping forward, propelled by a morbid curiosity that warred with self-preservation, I put my eye to the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed me nothing. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, empty. No figure, no shadow, nothing visible. But the scratching, the thudding, they were undeniably there, right on the other side of the wood, inches from my face. The disjunction between sight and sound sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Then, silence. Abrupt. Total. The scratching, the thudding, gone. The sudden absence of the noise was somehow more terrifying than the sound itself. I held my breath, listening. Nothing but the frantic thumping of my own heart and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Just as I began to think, crazily, that maybe it had gone, something dark slid silently under the door. It wasn't paper. It landed on the cheap entryway rug with a soft, metallic clink. Small. Tarnished. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process the shape. Then, recognition hit me like a physical blow. It was a miniature thumbscrew. Crude, yet detailed, fashioned from some dark, pitted metal. It looked ancient, yet chillingly familiar. I had seen its exact likeness just days ago, in the corrupted diagram file on my laptop, the one that had glitched and momentarily twisted its lines. This wasn't just mimicry anymore. This was a delivery. A tangible piece of the nightmare, crossing the threshold from the digital and the historical into my physical space. Proof. My laptop, still closed on the desk, suddenly chimed, the sound of a new notification. Impossible. It was off. Or supposed to be. Trembling uncontrollably, I forced myself to lift the lid again. The screen flickered to life, bypassing the login prompt. It wasn't my desktop. It was black, utterly black. Then, white text appeared, stark and centered, in a simple, cold font. Knowledge bears a price. Payment due. Below the text, the webcam light blinked back on. Green. Steady. Watching. That was it. The final shred of denial vaporized. This wasn't about scaring me. It wasn't a warning. It was collection. Whatever entity resided within the digital vaults of the Iron Library, whatever ancient or alien intelligence fixated on the geometry of suffering, it believed I owed it something. My access, my research, my gaze upon its forbidden knowledge, it had all come at a cost I hadn't understood. And now, it was here to collect. Flight. Raw, unthinking flight was the only response left. I scrambled away from the desk, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door, my phone falling from numb fingers as I fumbled for it. I didn't care. Clothes, wallet, research notes, the thesis itself, none of it mattered. Only escape. My hand closed around the deadbolt. The hallway outside the peephole had been empty, but the silence felt predatory. Was it waiting? Would opening the door invite it in fully? But staying was unthinkable. The apartment wasn't safe. It was the epicenter. With a sob, I twisted the lock and flung the door open. The hallway was empty. eerily, unnaturally still. No lingering presence, no figure lurking in the shadows by the stairwell. Just the faint smell of dust and stale air. I ran. Down the echoing stairwell, my footsteps frantic and loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Out the main entrance of the building, into the chill, damp air. The sky was beginning to pale in the east, streetlights casting long, fading shadows. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the apartment that had become a cage. Weeks have passed. Or maybe months. Time feels slippery, unreliable now. I'm hundreds of miles away, in a cheap motel room in a town whose name I barely registered. I destroyed the laptop. Left everything behind, my clothes, my books, my notes, the culmination of years of academic work. I abandoned Grace Miller and her doomed thesis. I drift, working cash-in-hand jobs, cleaning, washing dishes, trying to remain anonymous, invisible. But the escape is incomplete. The terror lingers, a permanent residue in my soul. I see the poses everywhere. The way a tired commuter leans against a pole, the sharp angle of a broken tree branch against the sky, the slump of a mannequin in a store window, they all echo the diagrams. The Iron Library's contents are imprinted on my mind, a gallery of horrors I can never unsee. I avoid reflections, terrified I might glimpse something standing behind me, mimicking agony. I jump at unexpected noises. Sleep offers little respite, filled with dreams of scratching sounds and cold, watching lights. The debt, it seems, is not so easily discharged. Knowledge, once acquired, cannot simply be abandoned. It changes you. It becomes part of you. The price wasn't just access. It was my peace, my sanity, my sense of a safe reality. Yesterday, scrolling through generic news feeds on a library computer, I avoid personal devices now, I saw an article. A prestigious international consortium of universities announcing a new collaborative project, a vast, secure digital archive dedicated to preserving challenging historical narratives. They called it the Veritas Collection. The article lauded its state-of-the-art security protocols, including mandatory, multi-factor biometric verification for all researchers. A chill, cold and familiar, traced its way down my spine. Later that evening, walking back to my motel under the buzzing fluorescent lights of an unfamiliar street, I glanced across the road. Underneath a flickering streetlight, half obscured by shadow, stood a figure. Perfectly still. One arm held out at an unnatural angle, head tilted back just so. A pose I knew intimately. The strappado. Preparatory stage. It wasn't looking at me, not directly. Just standing there. A silent, unwavering statement. We see you. We are still here. The library is eternal. I turned, heart pounding, and walked faster, disappearing into the anonymity of the night. But I know, with chilling certainty, that I haven't truly escaped. I just traded one cage for another. The debt is still outstanding. And the Iron Library, under whatever name it chooses, always collects. My name is Alex Miller. It feels strange even saying it now, like I'm describing someone I used to know. That Alex Miller had a life, a routine, a younger brother named Liam. This Alex Miller, well, This one just has the gnawing emptiness Liam left behind and an obsession that's devoured everything else. It's been 6 months since they found Liam in his cramped apartment bedroom, the official cause of death neatly typed up on a coroner's report: suicide. Asphyxiation. Case closed. Everyone seemed to accept it. Mom and Dad, shattered into a million pieces, found a strange sort of solace in the finality of the word. Suicide. It was horrible, unthinkable, but it was an answer. It allowed them to grieve a tragedy, not question a mystery. Liam's friends offered condolences laced with awkward admissions of not realizing how much he'd been struggling. The police offered sympathetic nods and case statistics about young men and depression. Everyone accepted it. Everyone but me. Liam was complicated. For years younger, he'd always lived slightly in my shadow, or maybe just parallel to my path, always veering off onto less traveled, sometimes rockier roads. We weren't the kind of brothers who finished each other's sentences, but there was a current underneath, an unspoken understanding forged in shared childhood bedrooms and late-night talks that occasionally breached the surface. He was smart, wickedly funny with a dark streak, but he was also impulsive, prone to chasing shortcuts and easy money. In the months before he died, he'd become withdrawn, yes, but it wasn't the listless apathy of depression I'd seen flickers of in him years ago. This was different. This was wired, agitated energy. He was jumpy, constantly checking his phone, his eyes darting towards windows and doors. He lost weight, not from lack of appetite, but from what looked like nervous energy burning him up from the inside. He'd waved off my concerns. Just stressed, man, he'd say, the words too quick, too practiced. New project online, big stakes. He was always cagey about his online projects. I assumed it was some gray area tech stuff, maybe dabbling in crypto schemes or something equally volatile. I warned him to be careful, told him it wasn't worth the risk if it was stressing him this much. He just laughed, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. Gotta risk it for the biscuit, Alex, he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand that felt unnaturally cold. Suicide? No. The Liam I knew, even the stressed, secretive Liam of those last few months, wasn't the type. He was a survivor, sometimes to his detriment, always looking for an angle, a way out. The official story felt wrong, like a cheap suit worn by an expensive truth. There was no note, which the detective brushed off as not uncommon. They pointed to some minor debts, some vague texts about feeling pressured, but it wasn't enough. Not for me. It didn't explain the way he'd flinched when a car backfired a week before he died, or the burner phone I found tucked deep in his sock drawer after the fact, wiped clean, of course. My initial attempts to dig deeper were met with walls. The police considered the case closed, my questions an annoyance born of grief. Son, the lead detective, a weary man named Harrison, had told me, patting my arm condescendingly, grief makes us see things that aren't there. Your brother was under a lot of pressure. It's a tragedy, but trying to make it something else won't bring him back. Liam's friends knew nothing, or claimed they did. They just echoed the suicide narrative. My parents were too fragile to entertain my doubts, clinging to the official story as a shield against even darker possibilities. I felt like I was screaming into a void. Frustration festered, curdling into a desperate resolve. If the normal avenues were closed, I'd have to find another way. The thought had been lurking in the back of my mind, a seed planted by Liam's own vague references to the deep end of the internet. The dark web. A place spoken of in hushed tones, synonymous with illicit dealings, forbidden knowledge, and genuine danger. It felt like stepping off a cliff, but I was already in free fall. What difference did it make? Getting there was disturbingly easy. A specific browser, some basic precautions gleaned from nervously scanned forums, and I was in. It wasn't the Hollywood hyperbole of flashing neon skulls and overt threats. It was worse. It was mundane and terrifyingly functional. Stark text directories, broken links, forums filled with cryptic jargon and usernames that radiated malice. The air felt thick with secrets, the digital equivalent of a damp, lightless cellar where unseen things scuttled just beyond your line of sight. I started searching. Hours bled into days, fueled by caffeine and the hollow ache in my chest. I typed Liam's name, his known aliases, variations on his online handles. I searched for police file leaks in our city, coroner report discrepancies, anything. Most of what I found was garbage, dead links, obvious scams offering fortunes or hitmen, forums discussing sickeningly graphic content I quickly learned to avoid. The sheer volume of digital detritus was overwhelming, a tidal wave of the worst aspects of humanity. Doubt gnawed at me. Was this pointless? Was I just torturing myself, chasing shadows in a digital hellscape while the simple, awful truth sat staring me in the face? Then, I found it. Buried deep in a poorly indexed marketplace forum, nestled between listings for stolen credit cards and counterfeit pharmaceuticals, was a vendor profile. The username was simple, almost sterile, Janice. The listing was brief, sensitive LEO data. Case files. Inquiries welcome. Secure drop. Below it, testimonials, short, cryptic phrases, legit, got what I needed, fast. It was vague, professional, and utterly chilling. LEO, law enforcement officer. Could this be it? A disgruntled cop selling case files? A hacker who'd breached police servers? My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the precipice. Contacting this vendor felt like lighting a fuse without knowing how long it was or what was attached to the other end. Common sense screamed at me to close the browser, delete the software, try to accept what happened to Liam and move on. But the image of Liam's face, taut with that unnatural anxiety, flashed in my mind. The memory of his cold hand on my shoulder. The unanswered questions. I sent the message. Encrypted, of course, following the protocols mentioned in the forum. I kept it simple, referencing Liam's case number, obtained from the public police report, and asking if Janice had anything related, anything unofficial. The reply came faster than I expected, maybe an hour later. Just 2 words, possible. Price. He or she or they named a price in Monero, a cryptocurrency favored for its privacy features. It wasn't astronomical, but it was significant enough to hurt, enough to make me pause. This could be a scam. I could be throwing money into the void, money I barely had. But the alternative, living with the unanswered questions, with the gut feeling that the official story was a lie, was worse. With trembling hands, I navigated the labyrinthine process of acquiring the Monero and sending it to the anonymous address provided by Janice. The transaction confirmation felt less like a receipt and more like signing a contract in blood. Then, silence. Hours passed. The initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a sickening dread. Had I been ripped off? Had I just announced my interest in a closed case to someone dangerous for nothing? Just as I was about to give up, resigning myself to failure and the loss of the money, a new message pinged in my encrypted inbox. It was from Janice. No text this time, just a link to a file hosting service I didn't recognize and a simple password string. My breath hitched. I clicked the link. A download prompt appeared, case_lmc_sub.rar. LMC, Liam Michael Cooper. My brother. It was real. The file wasn't huge, only about 50 megabytes, which seemed odd if it contained extensive police data. Maybe it was heavily compressed. I downloaded the file, my computer's fans whirring louder, protesting the unfamiliar source. My antivirus software threw up a warning, which I bypassed with a knot tightening in my stomach. I typed in the password Janice provided. The archive began to extract. A folder appeared on my desktop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse as I double-clicked to open it. Inside, chaos. Dozens of files, most with garbled names, random strings of characters. I clicked on a few. Corrupted data. Error messages. Fragments of images that wouldn't load. Text documents filled with meaningless symbols. It looked like junk, digital garbage. The sinking feeling returned. I'd been scammed after all. Just another desperate fool throwing money at shadows on the dark web. I slumped back in my chair, the bitter taste of defeat rising in my throat. But then, amidst the digital wreckage, one file stood out. Its name wasn't garbled. It was simply audio_rec_final.aes. An encrypted audio file. Small, barely a megabyte. My heart started pounding again, a frantic drum against the silence of my apartment. Final? Final what? With a surge of adrenaline-fueled hope and terror, I searched for software capable of decrypting AES files, my mind racing. What was on this recording? The decrypted file sat there, audio_rec_final.wave, deceptively small on my desktop. My earlier despair evaporated, replaced by a buzzing, high-voltage dread. This was it. The core, hidden beneath layers of digital chaff. Finding the right decryption software took frantic searching through forums where legality seemed like a quaint suggestion. I finally landed on a reputable open-source tool, feeding it the AES file and the password string Janice had provided. The progress bar crawled across the screen, each percentage point tightening the vice around my chest. Error after error popped up as I initially fumbled the settings, convinced Janice had given me a dud key or that the file itself was another piece of corrupted junk, a final, cruel joke. Then, on the third try, tweaking a protocol setting I barely understood, the notification changed, decryption successful. Silence stretched in my small apartment, broken only by the hum of my overworked laptop and the frantic thumping in my ears. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling. Part of me, the part that still clung to sanity, screamed not to click, to delete the file, throw the laptop out the window, and run. But the image of Liam, not peaceful in death as the report suggested, but scared, hunted, overruled everything. I needed to know. I double-clicked. Windows Media Player opened, a familiar interface for something utterly alien. For a few seconds, there was only static, a harsh digital hiss like an untuned radio. I almost stopped it, thinking it was empty, another dead end. Then, underneath the static, a sound emerged. A ragged gasp. A choked sob. And then, his voice. Liam's voice. Oh God, no. It was distorted, tinny, clearly recorded on a cheap microphone, maybe a phone clutched in a trembling hand. But it was him. Stripped bare of the forced nonchalance, the casual humor he usually wore like armor. This was raw terror, scraped clean of everything but panic. My breath caught in my throat. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. Cornered, can't get out. There were muffled thuds in the background, indistinct shuffling. Was he hiding? Was he trapped? They knew I'd talk. Another ragged breath, closer to the mic this time, desperate. Alex, man, if you find this, if you somehow... His voice broke. He was crying. My little brother, who I hadn't seen cry since he was 10 and fell out of the oak tree in our backyard, was sobbing in pure terror. It was the Janice gig, the data. Shouldn't have copied it, shouldn't have looked. Janice. The name hit me like a physical blow. The vendor. My vendor. The one I just paid. Liam knew him. Liam was involved with him. This wasn't just random dark web trouble. It was this. They see everything, Alex, Liam gasped, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper, as if afraid of being overheard even on a recording meant for later. The network, the brokers, it's all connected. The Ilio data, it's bait, trap, they use it. He choked back another sob. Told them I didn't have it anymore, wiped everything, but they don't believe me. Said I owed, the commission, the interest. Commission? Interest? Was he brokering data for Janice? Or had he stolen something? The background sounds grew louder, a scraping noise, maybe footsteps outside a door. Liam's breathing hitched. Listen, Alex, he pleaded, the words tumbling out in a rush. Don't dig. Don't go looking. Whatever they told you happened to me, just accept it. Please. These people, they don't leave loose ends. They're not just hackers. They're serious. They know people. Real people. He mentioned my name again. Not just a warning, but a plea. Directed at me, across the void of death and encrypted data. He knew, somehow, that I wouldn't accept the official story. He knew I'd come looking. Tell Mom, tell Dad. He couldn't finish the sentence. There was a sudden loud bang from the background of the recording. Not a gunshot, more like a door being slammed open or kicked in. Liam yelped, a short, sharp sound of pure fear. There was a clatter, as if the phone had been dropped. Muffled shouting, voices I couldn't make out, harsh and guttural. Then, abruptly, silence. Not the silence of the recording ending cleanly, but a dead, heavy silence. The static returned for a second, then the player indicated the end of the file. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, the silence in my apartment now deafening. Liam's terrified voice echoed in my skull. Every doubt I'd harbored, every scrap of unease, coalesced into a hideous certainty. He hadn't killed himself. He'd been killed. cornered, terrified, silenced by the very people he was warning me about. People connected to Janice. People I had just contacted, invited into my life. Vindication was a bitter ash in my mouth. I was right, but being right meant Liam had died afraid and alone, hunted. Grief crashed over me, heavier than before, mingled with a white-hot rage and a cold, creeping fear that started in my stomach and spread outwards, numbing my limbs. I hit replay, listening again, straining to hear more in the background noise, in the muffled shouts, anything that could give me a clue. But there was nothing, only Liam's terror and that awful, final silence. My mind raced, trying to assemble the pieces. Liam got involved with Janice, maybe handling sensitive data, police files, information people would kill for. He copied something he shouldn't have, or double-crossed them, or couldn't pay some exorbitant debt or commission. Janice, or the network behind him, found out. They hunted him down. They killed him, staging it to look like a suicide. But why include the audio file? Why leave this single, damning piece of evidence in the data package sold by Janice? It made no sense. Unless it wasn't a mistake. Unless it was intentional. A warning? A test? A sick, twisted game to see what I would do? Or worse, a way to confirm I had the decryption key, that I was listening? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. They knew Liam had a brother. They knew someone might come looking. Had they laid this trail deliberately? I thought back to Liam's jumpiness, his paranoia. He hadn't been exaggerating. He'd been hunted. And now, had I just painted a target on my own back? I'd used Liam's case number. I'd asked specifically about him. I'd paid Janice. I'd downloaded the file. I'd decrypted the audio. They would know. Through the software, through the download link, through means I couldn't even fathom, they would know. Just as that horrifying realization fully settled in, cementing itself like ice in my gut, a notification sound chimed softly from my laptop. A new message. On the same encrypted platform I'd used to contact Janice. My blood ran cold. I hadn't closed the window. Hesitantly, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, I clicked on the notification. The sender ID was Janice. The message was short, terse, devoid of any preamble. Loose ends make messy business. Hope you're tidier than he was. The words hung there on the screen, stark white against the dark interface. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement and an unambiguous threat. They knew I'd heard the audio. They knew Liam had warned me. They knew I was the loose end now. Tidier. The implication was nauseatingly clear. Be quiet, disappear, or be cleaned up. Just like Liam. The anonymity of the dark web evaporated in an instant, replaced by the chilling certainty that I was seen, known, and marked. The silence of my apartment pressed in, no longer empty, but filled with unseen watchers, the echo of my brother's final terror, and the cold promise of messy business. The message from Janice burned itself onto my retinas. Loose ends make messy business. Hope you're tidier than he was. Tidier. The word echoed in the suffocating silence of my apartment, a sterile, corporate euphemism for something brutal and final. My blood turned to ice water. Every rational thought dissolved into raw, animal panic. I scrambled back from the laptop, my chair screeching against the floorboards, convinced cameras were watching from the webcam, microphones listening through the speakers. I ripped the Ethernet cable from the wall, fumbled to disable Wi-Fi, my fingers clumsy with terror. But it was useless, wasn't it? They knew. They had Liam's voice, terrified, warning me about them, warning me about Janice. They delivered it to my virtual doorstep. They knew I had it. Cutting off the internet now was like trying to unring a bell. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in. Every shadow stretched into a menacing figure. Every creak of the building settling, every distant siren, every car passing on the street below sounded like an approach, a harbinger. Sleep became impossible. When exhaustion finally claimed me for brief, nightmare-filled stretches, I'd jerk awake at the slightest sound, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. Food tasted like cardboard. The paranoia was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Who could I tell? The police? Detective Harrison's weary, dismissive face swam before my eyes. Son, grief makes us see things. How could I explain this? Show them an audio file obtained illegally from a dark web vendor named Janice, a file containing my dead brother's last terrified words, implicating the very source of the file in his murder? They think I was insane, or worse, involved. Liam's warning echoed, they know people. Real people. What if Janice, or the network he represented, had tendrils reaching into law enforcement itself? The LEO data wasn't just bait, it was a statement of capability. Going to the cops could be walking directly into the lion's den. My parents were unthinkable. The truth would utterly destroy them, shatter the fragile peace they'd found in the lie of suicide. And if these people knew about me, they likely knew about my family too. Telling them wouldn't just break their hearts, it could paint targets on their backs. My friends? They'd try to help, I suppose, but what could they do against anonymous, lethal shadows operating in the deepest corners of the internet? I was utterly, terrifyingly alone with this knowledge, trapped between a truth that could kill me and a lie I couldn't live with. For days, I existed in this limbo of fear, jumping at shadows, replaying Liam's voice and Janice's threat in my head on an endless loop. I stared at the other files from the Janice download, the corrupted data. Was there anything else hidden there? Using the same decryption tool, I tried feeding it fragments, hoping for another miracle. Nothing. Just garbage. Maybe the audio file was the only intentional piece, the hook, the warning. Tidier. What did it mean? Did they expect me to destroy the file, delete my communications, pretend none of this ever happened? Would they believe me? Liam had tried to assure them he'd wiped everything, and they hadn't believed him. They wouldn't believe me either. Loose ends needed to be cut. Or perhaps tidiness meant something else. Perhaps it meant ensuring that if they came for me, the mess wouldn't be contained. A new resolve began to form amidst the terror, cold and sharp. They thought they could silence Liam and leave no trace but a convenient, false narrative. They thought they could intimidate me into burying the truth. They saw me as another loose end to be neatly snipped away. But what if a loose end refused to be cut cleanly? What if, when pulled, it unraveled everything? Running felt futile. Hiding felt like waiting for the inevitable axe to fall. Silence felt like complicity in Liam's murder and my own potential demise. There was only one path left, however slim, however dangerous. Exposure. Not through official channels, but through the same chaotic, anonymous medium where this nightmare began. The web. If they were watching my digital footprint, they'd see this coming. Maybe that was the point. Maybe daring to speak out was the only way to disrupt their control, to introduce chaos into their tidy calculations. It was a desperate gamble, fueled by grief, rage, and the dregs of adrenaline. I reconnected the modem, the blinking lights feeling like malevolent eyes. I opened a simple text editor, the blank white page stark against the darkness of my screen and my mood. And I began to write. Everything. My doubts about Liam's death, the descent into the dark web, finding Janice, the corrupted files, the chilling audio recording, the final, terrifying message. I wrote like a man possessed, pouring out the fear, the paranoia, the certainty of what happened to my brother. I wrote knowing that every word typed might be bringing them closer. As I wrote, new messages would occasionally pop up in the encrypted chat window I still had open, minimized but never closed. Short, cryptic intrusions from Janice. Thinking won't help you, Alex. Some doors should remain closed. Tidiness requires action. Or inaction. Each message was a fresh jolt of terror, confirming they were watching, waiting, perhaps even amused by my futile struggles. But instead of deterring me, it fueled my desperate resolve. They wanted me silent, paralyzed by fear. Writing this, preparing to share it, felt like the only weapon I had left. I packaged the audio file, Liam's last words, his warning. I debated editing out my name, his references to our parents, but decided against it. The raw, specific horror was the point. This couldn't be dismissed as fiction. I attached it to my written account. My plan was simple, upload it everywhere I could. Dark web forums, ClearNet sites known for hosting user-generated horror stories and unsolved mysteries, anywhere someone might see it, read it, hear Liam's voice. Let the story propagate like a virus, impossible to completely erase. It wouldn't bring Liam back. It probably wouldn't bring his killers to justice. But it would ensure they didn't get away clean. It would make the loose end messy indeed. It was the only way I could think of to be tidier in my own defiant way, ensuring the truth wasn't buried with me. Finally, it was done. The story, my story, lay bare. The audio file attached. My finger hovered over the mouse, ready to click upload, post, submit on a dozen different tabs open in my browser. This was it. The point of no return. A deep breath, tasting of stale coffee and fear. I clicked again and again, sending my desperate message in a bottle out into the vast, indifferent ocean of the internet. A strange sense of calm washed over me for a beat, the calm after the storm, the quiet after the scream. I'd done it. Liam's voice wouldn't be silenced entirely. The truth, or at least my version of it, was out there. Then I heard it. A faint scratching sound. Not from the building settling, not from the street below. This was closer. Outside my apartment door. My blood froze. The calm evaporated instantly, replaced by a tidal wave of adrenaline and pure terror that left me breathless, paralyzed. Another sound. Metal scraping against metal. A key sliding into the lock. My lock. I didn't lock the deadbolt. I always lock the deadbolt. Didn't I? The tumblers clicked, loud in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. The doorknob began to turn. My name is Isabella Rossi, and I am an artist. That statement feels both definitive and deceptively simple. Most people think of artists as creators of beauty, translators of light, weavers of pleasant dreams onto canvas. I suppose, in a way, I do translate. But my medium isn't light, it's shadow. My inspiration isn't beauty, at least not in the conventional sense. It's the raw, uncomfortable truth that festers beneath the polished surface of the everyday. It's the grit, the decay, the quiet horror that lingers in forgotten corners and behind closed doors. My brush strokes don't capture serene landscapes, they trace the contours of bruises, the geography of fear etched onto a face, the stark finality in a lifeless stare. For years, my work has explored the macabre. Not the cheap, jump-scare horror of B-movies, but the deeper, psychological dread. The kind that settles in your bones and whispers that the world isn't as safe or sane as you pretend it is. My studio, a converted loft overlooking the less gentrified side of downtown, is a testament to this obsession. Canvases lean against every wall, depicting scenes that would make most gallery patrons flinch, a distorted reflection in a pool of stagnant water hinting at something submerged, the skeletal remains of a bird caught mid-flight against a blood-orange sky, the oppressive emptiness of a room moments after violence has occurred, the silence screaming louder than any cry. My collectors appreciate the unflinching honesty, the willingness to gaze into the abyss. They call it visceral, uncompromising, brave. I just call it seeing things as they are. But lately, a frustrating limitation had begun to gnaw at me. My work relies on authenticity, on capturing the feeling of these dark moments. Yet, my source material felt increasingly mediated, filtered. News reports sanitize crime scenes, blurring faces, cropping out the truly gruesome details. Online searches yield heavily censored images, often staged reconstructions or distant shots lacking the intimate horror I craved. Stock photos are a joke, plastic mannequins and careful splashes of red paint. It felt like trying to paint a wildfire using only descriptions written by people terrified of heat. I needed more. I needed the undiluted truth, the raw impact of reality, no matter how ugly. My art demanded it. My hunger demanded it. It wasn't about morbid curiosity alone, though I won't deny a sliver of that exists within me, the same sliver I suspect resides in anyone who slows down to look at a car crash. For me, it was about understanding the texture of finality, the aesthetics of tragedy. How does light fall on shattered glass when the shattering was caused by a bullet? What is the precise shade of blood on different fabrics, under different lighting conditions, after different amounts of time? These weren't questions born of ghoulishness, but of artistic necessity. To paint the darkness accurately, I had to see it, truly see it, in its most unvarnished state. This relentless pursuit led me, perhaps inevitably, down the rabbit hole of the internet's shadowed corners. I heard the whispers, the legends of the dark web, a hidden layer accessible only through specific browsers, promising anonymity and access to things the surface web wouldn't dare host. Illicit marketplaces, forbidden forums, and, crucially for me, repositories of the uncensored. It took research, caution, and a Tor browser, but eventually, I found myself navigating the stark, text-heavy interfaces of this hidden realm. It felt like stepping into a digital back alley, potent with the scent of danger and forbidden knowledge. It was there, amidst forums discussing topics best left unimagined and marketplaces selling data I didn't want to know existed, that I found the link. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple onion address mentioned in a hushed, coded conversation about visual resources for the discerning eye. The site it led to was minimalist, almost unnervingly professional in its starkness. Black background, gray text. The name chilled me even as it drew me in, aftermath exposures. There was no elaborate introduction, no manifesto. Just a simple tagline, reality, unfiltered. Below it, a series of gallery categories listed with chillingly banal titles: industrial accidents, urban decay, terminal conditions, conflict zones, and the one that made my pulse quicken, domestic still lives. I clicked it. A submenu appeared: natural causes, suicide, homicide, murder-suicide. The last one seemed to hold the most potent blend of despair and violence I sought to understand. Aftermath Exposures didn't offer individual photos. It sold exclusive galleries, complete sets documenting a single event, promising comprehensive coverage from multiple angles, often including details investigators' official files omit. The descriptions were brief, clinical, providing only a location, usually just a state or region, a date range, and the nature of the incident. The prices were steep, payable only in untraceable cryptocurrency. This wasn't some amateur core site. It felt curated, deliberate, catering to a specific, demanding clientele. Who else would pay such sums for such grim documentation? Pathologists? Certain kinds of researchers? Or others like me, artists chasing the phantom of authentic darkness? I scrolled through the available murder-suicide galleries. Recent entries were marked with a small, crimson asterisk. One caught my eye immediately. The location listed was local, shockingly so. Not just my state, but my county. The date range indicated it had happened less than a week ago. I remembered the brief, vague news report: a couple found dead in their suburban home, a suspected murder-suicide, names withheld pending notification of kin. The usual sterile summary that told you nothing of the actual horror. A strange, electric thrill mixed with a cold dread passed through me. Local. Recent. The immediacy was intoxicating. This wasn't some distant tragedy, it was practically in my backyard. The potential for understanding, for feeling the proximity of such an event, was immense. The description promised unprecedented access and clarity. Hesitation warred with my artistic drive. This felt like crossing a significant line, moving from observing the abstract concept of darkness to purchasing a tangible piece of a real, recent, local tragedy. But the hunger won. The need to see, to know, overwhelmed the ethical qualms. My art demanded it. I navigated the anonymizing process, transferred the required Bitcoin, my fingers trembling slightly as I clicked confirm. A simple message appeared: transaction complete. Gallery access link will be delivered securely within 24 hours. The wait was agonizing. I tried to paint, but my hands felt unsteady, my mind preoccupied. The studio, usually my sanctuary of controlled shadows, felt charged with a nervous energy. What would I see? Would it be too much? Would it break something within me? Or would it finally provide the key, the missing element to elevate my work beyond mere representation into the realm of true, visceral experience. I paced the floor, the city lights outside painting shifting patterns on my canvases, oblivious to the darker transaction I had just initiated. I was an artist seeking truth in the shadows, and I had just paid for a guided tour into the heart of someone else's ultimate darkness. I had no idea that the tour would lead me somewhere far more terrifying than the crime scene itself. I had no idea the reflection I was about to find wouldn't just be in glass, but in the very fabric of reality. The link arrived 18 hours later. The email containing the access link arrived with unnerving simplicity. No fanfare, no warnings, just a string of characters and a single instruction: click to access your procured gallery. Link valid for 72 hours. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it. The point of no return. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, a betrayal of the cool, detached observer I usually prided myself on being, I clicked the link. A sterile gray loading bar filled, then vanished, replaced by the interface of aftermath exposures. It was as minimalist as the main site. A grid of thumbnails, perhaps 30 or 40 in total, populated the screen. Each was a small, dark square hinting at the larger horror within. No descriptions, just numbers: AEMS LOC 734-01, AEMS LOC 734-02, and so on. The clinical designation felt obscene against the implied content. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before plunging into icy water, and clicked the first thumbnail. The image loaded instantly, filling my monitor with a resolution so sharp it felt like I could reach through the screen and touch the scene. It was breathtaking in the most literal, oxygen-stealing way. The quality was astounding, far exceeding anything I'd ever seen from official sources or news leaks. This wasn't grainy, flash-bleached crime scene photography. This was artful. The lighting was dramatic, chiaroscuro, shadows clinging to corners while stark light illuminated the central subject: an overturned armchair, a shattered lamp, a dark, spreading stain on the beige carpet that my mind instantly, clinically identified. I clicked through the next few images, morbidly fascinated, professionally analytical, yet increasingly disturbed. A close-up of a hand, slack-jawed in repose, the detail so fine I could see the pores in the skin, the tiny imperfections that made it undeniably human, undeniably over. Another showed a pattern of blood spatter on a wall, not just documented, but framed with an almost deliberate composition, the crimson droplets stark against the pale paint. A discarded weapon lay on a polished wooden floor, catching a sliver of light, looking less like evidence and more like a prop in a carefully staged tableau. The horror was absolute, visceral, exactly the raw truth I had craved. Yet, beneath the shock of the content, a different kind of unease began to curdle in my stomach. These photos felt wrong. Not just morally wrong, but procedurally wrong. What were the evidence markers? The forensic scales? The yellow tape intruding into the frame? There was no sign of the investigative process that inevitably follows such a discovery. These photos depicted the scene in a state of pristine, undisturbed horror, as if captured mere moments after the violence concluded, but before anyone official had arrived and begun their work. The clarity was supernatural, the angles too perfect, the lighting too controlled. It felt less like documentation and more like a performance, captured by an invisible, unnervingly skilled observer. I pushed the unease aside, attributing it to the sheer shock, the unprecedented access. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? The unfiltered reality. I continued clicking, moving through the grim inventory of a shattered domestic sphere. Kitchen counters, family photos on the mantelpiece now juxtaposed with unimaginable gore, the quiet tragedy of mundane objects left behind in the wake of ultimate violence. Then I arrived at image AEMS LOC 734-17. It showed a hallway, looking towards the front of the house. On the left wall, a series of framed family pictures hung slightly askew. The carpet showed footprints, faint, but there, in something dark. The main focus, however, was the front door at the end of the hall. It was one of those doors common in suburban homes, solid wood, but with a large, decorative glass panel set into the upper half, perhaps frosted or leaded for privacy, but still reflective. Outside, through the clear portions of the glass, I could see the blurry shapes of houses across the street, rendered indistinct by the darkness and the distance. But it wasn't the scene inside or the view outside that made me freeze. It was the reflection on the glass panel. At first, it was just a shape, a distortion in the reflective surface, caught in the ambient light spilling from the hallway. Standard stuff. Reflections happen. But something about the shape snagged my attention. It seemed solid, deliberate. I leaned closer to the monitor, my nose inches from the screen. I clicked the zoom tool, magnifying the glass panel. The image quality held, pixel perfect, revealing the reflection with chilling clarity. My breath hitched. My blood ran cold. Standing there, reflected in the glass of the murder house's front door, was a figure. A figure standing across the street, looking towards the house. A figure wearing a dark gray trench coat, scarf pulled up slightly, dark hair escaping from under a beanie. A figure holding her phone up, illuminated by the screen's glow. A figure that was undeniably, horrifyingly, me. No! My mind screamed denial. It can't be. It had to be a trick of the light, a pareidolia effect, my overwrought imagination projecting myself onto the scene. But the detail was too precise. The coat was mine. I'd bought it last fall. The stance, the slight tilt of the head, the way I habitually held my phone when observing something intently, it was me. Every detail, reflected with impossible precision on the glass panel of a door within a sealed crime scene. But the owl was the scream that tore through my denial. I remembered that night, just a few days ago. The wail of sirens piercing the suburban quiet. Drawn by that familiar, dark curiosity, I'd driven over, parking a block away and walking closer. I remembered standing across the street, behind where the police were starting to unfurl yellow tape. I remembered the flashing red and blue lights washing over the houses, the grim ballet of emergency responders. I remembered watching the front door, wondering what horrors lay beyond it. Crucially, I remembered the timeline. The police were securing the perimeter. First responders might have made a quick entry to confirm the situation, but the house was sealed. Forensic teams, detectives, the official photographers, none of them had begun their systematic internal processing of the scene yet. That came later. This photograph, AEMS LOC 734-17, was taken from inside the hallway, looking out the front door. It captured my reflection, standing across the street, phone screen glowing, silhouetted against the flashing police lights. It documented my presence as an outside observer before the owls had been officially opened and processed. How could a photograph of this quality, from this internal vantage point, exist from that precise moment? Who was inside the house, taking pictures with such artistic clarity before the investigation truly began? Capturing me, a random onlooker miles away in significance, yet frozen in this impossible reflection? Panic seized me, cold and sharp. My hands flew to my keyboard, checking the image file's properties. Empty. Metadata scrubbed clean. Of course. I scanned the pixels again, desperate for any sign of digital manipulation, any flaw in the illusion. There was none. The reflection was seamlessly integrated, the lighting consistent, the focus perfect. It looked utterly, terrifyingly real. If it was real, the implications fractured my understanding of reality. Was the photographer the perpetrator, lingering to capture their work and, inexplicably, a bystander outside? Or was aftermath exposure something else entirely? Something that didn't just document aftermaths, but somehow existed within them? I slammed my laptop shut, the click echoing too loudly in the sudden silence of my studio. But the image was burned behind my eyelids. My reflection, staring back at me from the glass door of a murder house, captured from a place I'd never been, by a photographer who shouldn't have been there, documenting a moment that couldn't have been recorded that way. The darkness I had paid to see wasn't just the blood and despair within the house. It was the impossible paradox staring back at me, wearing my own face. The transaction felt suddenly sinister, not just illicit, but like an invitation. And something had just RSVP'd. Sleep refused to come that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, AEMS LOC 734-17. The hallway, the door, the familiar street outside warped through the glass, and that impossible reflection, my own face, pale and watching, captured from within the heart of a fresh grave. I'd reopen the laptop, the sickly glow illuminating my studio, and stare at the image until my eyes burned. I compared it obsessively to my memory of that night, the exact position I stood, the pattern of flashing police lights, the feeling of the cold air, the specific moment the yellow tape started going up. My memory was adamant. I was outside, they were outside, the house was sealed. The photo remained defiant, taken from inside, featuring me outside, before the official inside work began. Rationalization became my desperate anchor in the storm. It had to be a fake. A sophisticated deep fake, perhaps, crafted by the shadowy purveyors of aftermath exposures for reasons I couldn't fathom. Maybe they harvested images of people near crime scenes and inserted them for some sick artistic statement or added value. I spent hours I should have been painting poring over online forums dedicated to digital forensics, running analyses I barely understood on the image file. Software found no telltale signs of manipulation, no pixel inconsistencies, no lighting mismatches. If it was a fake, it was perfect. Flawless. Indistinguishable from reality. Which, in its own way, was just as terrifying. I tried to research the case further, scouring local news archives and obscure online forums for any scrap of information about the investigation's timeline. Did first responders linger inside? Could an officer have unofficially snapped photos? Nothing supported the existence of that photo. The reports were standard, vague. The official narrative held firm. My photo remained an anomaly, a ghost in the machine. One gray afternoon, Fueled by caffeine and a gnawing dread, I drove back to the street. The house looked painfully ordinary now. Cleaned up, curtains drawn, a for sale sign already hammered into the lawn, erasing the recent horror with brutal suburban efficiency. I parked across the street, near where I had stood that night. I looked at the front door. The glass panel seemed different, maybe replaced, maybe just catching the daylight differently. Standing there felt exposed. I had the unnerving sensation of being watched, not by the neighbors peeking through their blinds, but by the house itself, by the memory embedded in the very air. I imagined a lens, hidden somewhere behind that new glass, focusing on me. I left quickly, the feeling of unseen eyes following me all the way home. My attempts to find answers from the source were equally futile. When I tried navigating back to aftermath exposures through the Tor browser, the Onion address led nowhere. A blank screen, a site not found error in the stark dark web interface. It was as if it had dissolved back into the digital ether from whence it came, leaving behind only the poison gallery downloaded onto my hard drive. The seller, the artist, the archivist of death, whoever they were, remained anonymous, untraceable, silent. The silence, however, didn't extend to my own mind. The lack of answers festered, breeding paranoia like mold in damp darkness. Reflections became my enemies. A glimpse in a shop window as I walked past. Was that my reflection, or the figure from the photo, wearing my face? A flicker in the polished surface of my coffee machine. Did it move after I looked away? Mirrors felt malevolent, holding the potential to show me not just myself, but that self, the impossible observer trapped in the glass. I started avoiding my own gaze. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just on that street, it was in my studio, in crowded galleries, even in the perceived safety of my own bed. It was a cold, analytical presence, devoid of emotion, the same feeling I got from the photographs themselves, the detached gaze of the aftermath exposure's photographer. Had buying the gallery put me on their radar? Had my fascination with their work made me interesting? My art suffered, then mutated. I tried to paint, to channel the horror into my work as I always had. But the darkness felt different now. It wasn't something I was observing and interpreting. It felt like something observing me. My canvases became chaotic, filled with fractured perspectives, distorted reflections, eyes lurking in shadows. I tried painting the photo, the reflection in the glass door, but I couldn't capture the sheer, stomach-twisting wrongness of it. My own self-portraits became terrifying, the eyes looking not at the viewer, but past them, at something unseen, haunted. My agent called, concerned. My collectors noted anew, frantic desperation in the brush strokes, a departure from controlled darkness into something bordering on madness. What was aftermath exposures? What kind of person, or what kind of thing, could take those photos? Could move unseen through scenes of utter devastation, capturing impossible moments with artistic clarity? Was it a network of depraved individuals with unique access? Or was it something older, stranger? Something drawn to tragedy like a moth to a flame, existing in the liminal spaces between life and death, violence and silence? An entity that didn't just record aftermaths, but perhaps curated them? By purchasing their work, had I inadvertently invited the curator into my own life? Had I paid for the privilege of being seen by the shadow? One rain-slicked evening, working late in the studio, bathed in the cold light of my monitor as I fruitlessly tried to scrub the EXIF data from AEMS LOC 734-17 again, an email notification pinged. It wasn't my usual account. It came through the same encrypted channel used by aftermath exposures. My blood turned to ice water. There was no subject line. The body contained only a single attachment. With trembling fingers, I downloaded it. It wasn't a photo from the murder house. It was a photo of my studio, taken from an impossibly high angle, near the ceiling in the darkest corner, looking down at me hunched over my laptop. The resolution was perfect. The lighting, the shadows, the composition, it had the same chillingly artistic quality as the crime scene photos. Below the image, a single line of text. We appreciate your patronage. Your perspective is compelling. I stumbled back from the computer, a strangled cry caught in my throat. I scanned the corners of my studio, the ice ceilings, the shadows pooling beneath the skylights. Nothing. Just the familiar clutter, the scent of turpentine and old canvas. But the feeling of being watched was now absolute, suffocating. I deleted the gallery. I formatted the hard drive. I disconnected the laptop from the internet. But it was useless. The images were burned into my memory. The feeling of that cold, analytical gaze was now a permanent resident in my soul. I sought the darkness, wanting to understand its contours, its textures. I paid to see its most intimate moments. And the darkness, it seemed, had developed an appreciation for my perspective. Now, when I catch my reflection in a darkened window, in the glossy surface of a finished painting, I don't always look away fast enough. Sometimes, just for a fraction of a second after I turn my head, I think I see it linger. My own face, still watching me from the glass, the eyes holding the same chilling, impossible knowledge I saw in the photo from aftermath exposures. I am Isabella Rossi. I am an artist. And I am being seen by the shadow I invited in. My name is Kevin Smith. Yeah, that Kevin Smith. Well, not that Kevin Smith, the director guy. Just a Kevin Smith. One of probably thousands trudging through life under the banner of one of the most aggressively vanilla names conceived by the English-speaking world. I live in a moderately sized apartment in a city that's neither impressively large nor comfortingly small, working a data entry job that provides just enough income to cover rent, ramen, and the high-speed internet that serves as my primary escape hatch from the soul-crushing monotony. Most nights blend into a seamless loop of fluorescent office lights, microwave dinners, and the infinite scroll of the web. Excitement is a foreign concept, usually limited to finding a forgotten bag of chips in the back of the cupboard or a streaming service adding a movie I actually want to watch. This particular Tuesday night, however, boredom had reached critical mass. It wasn't just the usual ennui. It was a deep, aching void, a psychic itch that no amount of cat videos or arguing with strangers on forums could scratch. I'd cycled through all my usual digital haunts, news sites spewing the same recycled outrage, social media feeds showcasing curated happiness I couldn't relate to, video platforms serving up algorithms that knew me unsettlingly well yet still failed to truly engage me. I needed something different. Something with teeth. That's when I remembered the bookmark folder I'd labeled Curiosities, tucked away like a dirty magazine. It was a collection of links gathered over years of late-night browse tangents, whispers from obscure forums, breadcrumbs leading down rabbit holes I usually had the good sense not to follow. Most were probably dead ends or repositories of outdated memes, but the desperation was real tonight. Clicking through, I skipped past links promising forbidden knowledge or government secrets, usually just conspiracy blogs, until one caught my eye. It wasn't flashy, just a string of nonsensical characters ending in .onion, nestled beneath a cryptic description forwarded from some long-forgotten chat log. TCIS, the real deal. Not for tourists. TCIS, True Crime Investigation Simulator. My interest peaked. I've always had a morbid fascination with true crime, the podcasts, the documentaries, the deep dives into cold cases online. It's a common enough hobby, a safe way to flirt with the darkness from the comfort of your couch. But a simulator? From the dark web? That implied something beyond the usual sanitized retellings. The .onion extension meant firing up the Tor browser, a ritual that always felt vaguely illicit, like putting on a trench coat to buy milk. The browser worked to life, routing my connection through God knows where, and I pasted the link. The site that loaded was stark, brutalist in its design. Black background, plain white text. No graphics, no ads, just a single download link labeled TCIS_v3.1_stable.rar and a short, chilling paragraph. Think you have what it takes? Think you can stomach the truth? Commercial simulations are toys. Hollywood lies. We deal in reality. Unsolved cases. Real files. Real victims. No hand-holding. No easy answers. Download only if you understand. We are not responsible for the consequences. Consequences? Of a game? It sounded like edgy marketing copy, designed to appeal to people like me, bored and looking for a thrill. Still, a shiver ran down my spine. The file size was hefty, suggesting more than just a simple text adventure. Against my better judgment, fueled by the profound emptiness of my evening, I clicked download. The progress bar crawled. I drummed my fingers on the desk, glancing around my messy apartment, takeout containers stacked precariously, laundry threatening mutiny from its basket, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my own tired eyes. This was peak Kevin Smith, making questionable decisions alone in the dark. The download finished. I ran multiple virus scans. My paranoia wasn't completely dormant. Surprisingly, they all came back clean. Still, extracting the .rar file felt like handling unstable chemicals. Inside was a single executable, TCIS_interface.exe, and a folder simply labeled case files. No README, no instructions. I double-clicked the executable. My screen flickered, then resolved into an interface that looked like something dredged up from the late 90s, but with unsettling clarity. It resembled an old police database terminal, monochrome text, blocky cursors, stark dividers. A prompt blinked, load case file? I navigated to the case files folder. Inside were several subfolders, each named with a string of numbers and letters, presumably case identifiers. I picked one at random, CF_78A3B1_unsub_ chain do. Clicking it, the screen populated with data. It wasn't a game in the traditional sense, it was a meticulously organized archive. Scanned documents, police reports, autopsy summaries, witness statements appeared in a viewer window, complete with redactions that looked disturbingly authentic. There were crime scene photos, grainy and horrific, far more graphic than anything I'd ever seen in a documentary. Audio logs, supposedly digitized from microcassettes, played crackling recordings of interviews and dispatcher calls. A map interface allowed cross-referencing locations. A timeline feature let you plot events. The Jane Doe case was brutal. A young woman, unidentified, found in a derelict industrial park. The level of detail was staggering. I could zoom in on the photos to see minute details mentioned in the reports. I could read conflicting witness accounts, compare forensic data, fiber analysis, rudimentary DNA reports from the era. There were no hints, no objective markers like find the clue here. It was just information. Raw, unfiltered, and cold. It felt less like a game and more like being given temporary access to a real, albeit outdated, police server. I spent hours immersed. I cross-referenced addresses from witness statements with known associates mentioned in the file. I analyzed the ME's report, looking for inconsistencies. It was challenging, engrossing, and deeply unsettling. The simulator aspect seemed to lie purely in the interface providing the tools to navigate the data. The data itself felt chillingly real. Was it possible? Could these actually be leaked cold case files packaged as some kind of morbid entertainment? The dark web was capable of hosting stranger things. Over the next few nights, TCIS became my obsession. I tackled another case, a missing person from the early 2000s. Again, the realism was astonishing. Scanned diary pages, grainy gas station CCTV stills, bank records. I actually made some progress on that one, identifying a potential inconsistency in a timeline that the official investigation seemed to have missed. There was a grim satisfaction in it, a sense of intellectual engagement that my day job utterly lacked. I felt like a detective, albeit one wading through digital ghosts and tragedies sourced from the shadiest corner of the internet. I pushed the origin of the game to the back of my mind. It was just code, right? Just files. Then, last night, after I finally marked the missing person case as cold, all leads exhausted within the simulator's interface, there was no winning, only organizing the despair. A new message popped up on the main screen. Not an error, but a system notification within the TCIS environment itself. New DLC case file available for download. Enhanced interactivity protocols. User profile integration enabled. File name DLC_KS_inquiry. DLC. Downloadable content for this grim archive. Enhanced interactivity. User profile integration. That sounded odd. More game-like than the stark realism I'd gotten used to. And KS_inquiry? Were those my initials? Probably a coincidence. Kevin Smith, remember? Common as dirt. Still, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Curiosity, that dangerous old friend, won out again. My cursor hovered, then clicked. Download now. The download was almost instantaneous this time. No progress bar, just a flicker. A new folder appeared in my case files directory, DLC_KS_inquiry. My heart was beating a little faster now. The user profile integration part echoed unnervingly. I hesitated for a moment, the late night silence of my apartment suddenly feeling heavier. Then, steeling myself, I double-clicked to load the new case. The screen refreshed. The familiar, bleak interface appeared, but the header was different. It didn't list a case number or an anonymous victim. It simply read, Subject Profile, Kevin Smith. The words hung there on the screen, stark white against the oppressive black background of the TCIS interface. My blood ran cold. Kevin Smith. It had to be a coincidence, right? A placeholder name? Maybe part of the user profile integration meant it pulled the registered username of the computer? That had to be it. A creepy, invasive feature, sure, but explainable. A technical gimmick. I forced a shaky breath and clicked deeper into the case file structure, needing to disprove the impossible notion forming in my mind. The interface expanded, revealing subfolders typical of the other cases, personal details, residence, employment, known associates, behavioral patterns, surveillance log. Standard categories for profiling a person of interest. Except I was the person of interest. My cursor, trembling slightly, hovered over personal details. I clicked. A scanned document appeared in the viewer. It looked like a heavily redacted driver's license, but the photo, it was my photo. Not a recent one, maybe from college, but unmistakably me. My full name, Kevin Michael Smith. My date of birth, accurate. My hometown, correct. Even my damn height and eye color were listed. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a placeholder. This file was about me. Panic began to bubble in my chest, hot and acidic. How? How was this possible? Had I downloaded some kind of ultra-sophisticated spyware disguised as a game? Did it scrape my hard drive? But that wouldn't explain everything. I clicked on residence. A blueprint-style layout of my apartment materialized on screen. Not a generic floor plan, my floor plan. It showed the living room where I was sitting right now, the small kitchen with the perpetually dripping faucet, my bedroom, the bathroom. It even marked the position of my couch, my desk, the cheap bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. There were annotations: primary computing station location, window access point, rear alley, neighboring unit noise levels, moderate. It was clinical, detached, and utterly terrifying. It was like looking at my home through the eyes of someone casing it. My breathing grew shallow. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the window, peering through the blinds into the darkness of the back alley. Nothing but overflowing dumpsters and stray cats. I checked the lock on my front door, bolted. I felt a desperate urge to search for hidden cameras, bugs, anything, but where would I even start? Returning to the desk, feeling watched even in the empty room, I clicked on behavioral patterns. A timeline appeared, populated with entries that made my stomach churn. Subject departs residence for workplace, approximate 8:15 daily. True. Lunch routine varies. Frequent patronage of substation number 3 on Elm Street. True. I love their meatball sub. Evening activity, primarily sedentary. Online activity high. Food delivery common, preferred service quick eats, typical order, large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese. My order from last night. Observed sleep cycle, irregular. Often active past 2 o'clock. True, especially lately. It read like a Stasi report. My mundane life, documented with chilling accuracy. Where was this data coming from? It couldn't all be online scraping. My pizza orders? My walk to the sub shop? Then I clicked known associates. A short list appeared. Mark Davis, Sarah Chan, my two closest friends. Their names correctly spelled. Beneath Sarah's name, an annotation, recent communication log indicates subject discussed TCIS software with associate SC on, date 2 days ago. I froze. I had mentioned the weird simulator to Sarah in a text message, joking about playing detective. Just a brief exchange. How? Had my phone been compromised too? Was everything I typed, everything I said, being fed into this thing? The enhanced interactivity, the DLC description promise became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just presenting archive data, it was actively compiling a profile on me, potentially in real time. The user profile integration wasn't about customizing a game, it was about integrating me into the case file as the central subject. I frantically opened my system's task manager. Nothing looked overtly suspicious, just the usual background processes and TCIS_interface.exe humming along, consuming a moderate amount of resources. I ran another, deeper virus scan with a different tool. Nothing. It was clean. Or, more terrifyingly, it was too sophisticated to be detected. I tried navigating back to the program's installation folder. Maybe there was an uninstaller. There wasn't. Just the executable and the case files folder, now containing the horrifying DLC_KS_inquiry. I tried dragging the TCIS folder to the recycling bin. Error, file in use, the system chimed blandly. I tried ending the process in Task Manager. Access denied. Okay, stay calm. This was just software, sophisticated malware, maybe. Someone was messing with me. A hacker? A rival from some online forum I'd argue with? It felt too elaborate for that. Too specific. I went back to the dark web browser, intending to find the original site, maybe a forum thread, anything about TCIS. The .onion link was dead. Completely unresponsive. I searched the forums I remembered finding it mentioned on. The posts were gone. Any mention of TCIS yielded 0 results. It was like it had been scrubbed from existence, leaving only the copy currently running on my machine. My eyes drifted to the webcam built into the top of my monitor. A tiny, dark circle, lifeless. I always kept it covered with a piece of tape, a basic privacy measure everyone recommends. I reached up and touched the tape. It was still there, secure. A small comfort, but increasingly fragile. I needed to get this thing off my computer. Maybe booting in safe mode? Maybe a system restore? Before I could decide, my attention snapped back to the TCIS interface. A new entry had just appeared in the surveillance log subfolder. Timestamped just moments ago. Subject exhibits increased agitation. Physical inspection of residence locks conducted. Attempts made to terminate TCIS process via Task Manager failed. Attempts made to access Origin Network node failed. Subject currently inspecting webcam device. Asterisk. It knew what I was doing, step by step, as I did it. The tape over the webcam suddenly felt useless. Was the microphone listening? Were there keyloggers? How deep did the surveillance go? Then, a new file appeared under the evidence category within my profile. It was labeled audiolog_ks_residence_night cycle_3. My blood turned to ice. Night cycle 3 nights ago? With trembling hands, I clicked play. Silence at first. Then, the faint, familiar sound of my refrigerator humming. The distant wail of a siren outside. Then, breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing. My breathing. It was a recording of me sleeping. The quality wasn't great, slightly muffled, but it was unmistakable. Recorded from inside my apartment. I ripped the power cord of the computer from the wall socket. The monitor went black instantly. The low hum of the machine died. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. I sat there in the dark, shaking. My apartment, my sanctuary, felt violated, contaminated. The silence wasn't comforting, it was terrifying, pregnant with unseen observation. It wasn't just malware. It wasn't just a hacker. This was something else. Someone or something had an intimate, ongoing, invisible presence in my life, cataloging my existence, feeding it into a simulation of my own demise. My gaze flickered back to the dead monitor, then to the built-in webcam above it. The piece of tape was still there. But in the faint ambient light filtering through the blinds from the street lamp outside, I could have sworn I saw, just for a fraction of a second, a tiny pinprick of light behind the tape. I stumbled back from the desk, knocking over my chair. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The power was cut, the machine was off, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It felt like the darkness itself held its breath, waiting. Slowly, deliberately, I plugged the computer back in. I had to know. I had to see what it would do next. The machine whirred back to life. Windows booted up. And there, on my desktop, the TCIS interface immediately launched itself, full screen, unavoidable. The subject profile, Kevin Smith screen appeared. But now, there was a new notification flashing insistently at the bottom. A single, stark line of text that made the air freeze in my lungs. New objective received. The notification pulsed on the dark screen, each flash echoing the frantic thudding in my chest. My breath hitched. I felt nailed to the spot, my gaze locked onto those 4 words. What could the objective possibly be? Identify surveillance method? Neutralize TCIS threat? Wishful thinking. Given the context, given the cold, analytical cruelty of the files I'd explored, given the impossible knowledge this program possessed, I knew, deep down, it wouldn't be anything helpful. It would be part of the horror. My hand, slick with sweat, moved the mouse with agonizing slowness. The cursor hovered over the notification. Part of me screamed not to click, to rip the cord out again, to smash the machine, to run out of the apartment and never look back. But another part, the part paralyzed by a terrifying need to know, forced my finger down. Click. The notification vanished, replaced by stark, centered text. No case number, no preamble. Just the objective itself, colder and more final than any gravestone. Objective, solve the Kevin Smith disappearance. I read it once, twice. The words didn't immediately parse. Disappearance? My disappearance? It wasn't asking me to prevent it. It wasn't warning me. It was assigning me the task of investigating an event that hadn't happened yet. My own vanishing. The implication struck me like a physical blow. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a script. A pre-written narrative for the end of my mundane existence, and I was being invited, or perhaps compelled, to document it. And then, it happened. Above the screen, on the bezel of the monitor, a tiny, piercingly bright green light flicked on. The webcam. My webcam. The piece of tape I'd carefully placed over it was still there. I could see its outline, but the light shone through it, an emerald I suddenly opened, staring directly at me. A strangled gasp escaped my throat. I physically recoiled, stumbling backwards, the legs of my chair screeching against the wooden floor. I tripped, sprawling onto the warm rug, eyes wide, fixed on that unwavering green light. It was real. It was watching me. Right now. The tape, my pathetic little shield, was useless. Panic, raw and overwhelming, took hold. Primal terror flooded my system, drowning out rational thought. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. My apartment, moments ago my only refuge, now felt like a cage, a meticulously documented diorama for an unseen audience. Escape. I had to get out. I lurched towards the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt and chain lock with shaking hands. Locked. Good. But were they enough? I pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead fluorescent lights. No footsteps, no shadows. But the silence felt charged, unnatural. My phone. I needed to call someone. Mark? Sarah? The police? I patted down my pockets, finding my phone, screen dark. I thumbed the power button. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The battery had been fine moments ago. I frantically held the button down, praying for the startup logo. Dead. Completely, utterly dead. Coincidence? Or part of the script? I spun back towards the computer. The TCIS interface still dominated the screen. The objective, solve the Kevin Smith disappearance, seemed to mock me. Below it, the surveillance log had updated again. Subject reacted with extreme distress to objective reveal and webcam activation. Attempted egress via primary doorway, currently secure. Attempted use of personal communication device, rendered inoperative. Asterisk. It was tracking everything. Anticipating me? Disabling my attempts. Rage, born of terror, surged through me. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a thick textbook from my bookshelf, ironically on database management. I hefted it, stalked towards the desk, and swung it with all my might at the monitor. The screen imploded in a shower of sparks and fractured pixels. The image vanished, but the green webcam light stayed on. A single, malevolent eye glowing from the shattered wreck of the monitor. I screamed, a raw, incoherent sound of fury and fear, and swung again, hitting the webcam directly this time. More plastic crunched. The light finally extinguished. Silence. I stood panting, chest heaving, the heavy book still gripped in my hand. The immediate visual threat was gone. But the feeling of being watched, the certainty of the surveillance, remained heavier than ever. Destroying the monitor felt like swatting at a phantom. The source wasn't the screen, it was something deeper, more pervasive. Had I gained anything? Or just confirmed my helplessness? My gaze swept across my apartment. Every shadow seemed too deep, every mundane object potentially compromised. Was the smart speaker in the kitchen listening? The thermostat? How many ways could they see and hear? A faint vibration came from my pocket. My phone? I pulled it out. The screen lit up. Not with the home screen, but with the stark, black and white interface of TCIS. It had somehow migrated, or perhaps it was always there, dormant. On the phone's small screen, the objective pulsed. Objective: solve the Kevin Smith disappearance. Beneath it, a new entry in the log. Subject attempted physical destruction of primary interface node, partially successful. Surveillance rerouted to secondary device. Subject's emotional state, escalating panic, aggression. Asterisk. It was everywhere. Inescapable. I was trapped inside its investigation. My own investigation. A soft scraping sound came from the front door. My head snapped up. I strained my ears, holding my breath. Silence. Had I imagined it? Paranoia? Then, distinctly, click. The sound of a locked tumbler turning. From the outside, my blood ran colder than seemed possible. I backed away from the door, deeper into the apartment, clutching the heavy textbook like a weapon. My eyes darted towards the window leading to the fire escape. Could I make it? The doorknob began to turn. I didn't wait to see who, or what, was coming through. I spun and sprinted towards the window, fumbling with the latch. It stuck. Panic clawed at my throat. Behind me, I heard the creak of the apartment door opening. The window latch finally gave. I shoved the window open, the cold night air hitting my face. Scrambling out onto the narrow metal platform of the fire escape, I didn't look back. I just started climbing down, hands slipping on the cold, damp rungs, the darkness of the alleyway below promising uncertain refuge. I risked a glance upwards as I descended. My apartment window was dark now, but on the screen of the phone, still clutched tightly in my hand, the TCIS interface glowed. A final update appeared in the log just before I lost sight of it in the gloom. Subject has exited the primary residence via non-standard egress, fire escape. Current location designated, external alleyway. Tracking active. Status, evading. Asterisk. Then, the objective screen refreshed one last time. Objective, solve the Kevin Smith disappearance. Status, in progress. Epilogue, system log entry, TCIS Central Archive. File ID, DLC_KS_inquiry subject, Kevin Michael Smith case status, active-cold, time elapsed, 72 hours post-evasion event, last known coordinates, coordinates corresponding to the alley behind Kevin Smith's apartment building, communication device signal, terminated, Timestamp +0:05 hours post-evasion, surveillance assets, no current contact. Disposition, subject disappearance confirmed. Case file remains open pending further data or subject rediscovery. Investigation yielded no conclusive solution regarding terminal event sequence. Objective remains unresolved. Archive note, add case to unsolved disappearances database. Monitor relevant network chatter for subject identifiers. Close active tracking protocols.